Arizona Territory, 1879. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Jake Tucker wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting at the distant mountains shimmering in the heat. At 22, he'd already spent 4 years working cattle for the Diamond T Ranch, his lean frame and sun-bronzed skin a testament to the hard life he'd chosen. His chestnut hair curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and the light stubble on his jaw couldn't hide the youthful lines of his face. The cattle drive had been brutal, 3 weeks of dust and exhaustion, but they'd finally delivered the herd to the railroad station at Silver Creek. Now, with his pockets full of his share of the profits, Jake rode alone through Apache territory, taking a shortcut back to the ranch. Old Man Tucker, no relation, just the ranch owner who'd given Jake his start, had warned him about this route, but Jake was young and confident. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, he spotted something unusual among the rocks, a splash of color that didn't belong. Curiosity drew him closer. There, crumpled between 2 boulders, lay a young Apache girl, no more than 16 or 17. Her black hair was matted with blood from a wound on her temple, her deerskin dress torn and dirty. She was unconscious but breathing. Jake dismounted, approaching cautiously. He'd heard the stories. Tensions between settlers and Apaches had been building for years. Some ranchers spoke of the natives with hatred, but Jake's father had taught him differently before consumption took him 3 years prior. All God's children, his father would say. Remember that, son. The girl's eyes fluttered open as Jake knelt beside her, revealing eyes as dark as midnight. She flinched away, fear evident in her expression. I won't hurt you, Jake said softly, offering his canteen. Water. She hesitated, her gaze darting past him as if expecting others to appear. Jake tried again. My name is Jake. What's yours? After a long pause, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Kachina. Kachina, Jake repeated. That's pretty. Are you hurt bad? Can you stand? She winced as she tried to sit up. Jake noticed more bruises on her arms, handprints. This wasn't from a fall. Someone had done this to her. Who hurt you? He asked gently. Kachina's expression hardened. White soldiers. Jake felt cold despite the heat. He'd heard rumors of abuses by some cavalry units. I'm sorry, he said, knowing the words were inadequate. Let me help you get home. She shook her head. Cannot return. They will say I am dishonored. The implication hung in the air between them. Jake's jaw tightened with anger at what had likely happened to her. Then I'll take you somewhere safe, he decided. There's a mission about a day's ride from here. The sisters there help everyone, no questions asked. Kachina studied him, as if trying to determine if she could trust him. Finally, she nodded. What Jake didn't know as he helped her onto his horse was that this chance encounter would alter the course of both their lives forever. Nor could he imagine that 15 years later, the consequences of his choice would echo through the canyons of the Arizona Territory with the thunder of hoofbeats and war cries. The journey to the mission was slow and tense. Jake walked beside his horse, leading it carefully to avoid jostling Kachina's injuries. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow, and Jake kept his distance, trying to reassure her through his respectful behavior that she had nothing to fear from him. As the campfire burned low, Kachina spoke. Why do you help me? Jake considered the question. Because it's right, he said simply. Your people do not think helping Apache is right. Some don't, Jake agreed. But I'm not them. She watched him for a long moment. You have kind eyes. Like my brother. Where is your brother now? Dead, she said, her voice flat. Soldiers. Jake didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. I'm sorry. Why say sorry? You did not kill him. No, but... Jake struggled to explain. My people did. And that brings me shame. Kachina's expression softened slightly. You are strange for a white man. Jake smiled. I've heard that before. The next day, they reached the San Xavier mission by mid-afternoon. Sister Agnes, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, took one look at Kachina and ushered her inside without question. You did right bringing her here, the nun told Jake. We'll care for her. Jake hesitated. Will she be safe? Sister Agnes's eyes hardened. The Lord's house is open to all his children. Any man who disagrees will answer to me first, and him second. Having met Sister Agnes, Jake suspected most men would find God's judgment the more merciful option. Before he left, Kachina caught his arm. Why is your name Jake Tucker when ranch owner is Tucker too? Jake smiled. No relation. Just coincidence. She frowned, clearly not understanding. It's a common name, he explained. Like, like how many Apache might be called after the same animal or spirit. She nodded slowly. I will remember Jake Tucker, the one who helps. And I'll remember Kachina, he replied. Stay safe. As Jake rode away from the mission, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened. He glanced back once, seeing Kachina's slender silhouette in the mission doorway, before spurring his horse toward home. What he didn't see was the intensity in her gaze as she watched him go, or know that she had silently added her family name in her mind, Kachina Azul, a name she would reclaim one day, when the time was right. 6 months later, Jake rode back to the mission with a parcel of clothes and a small pouch of money he'd saved. But Kachina was gone. She left 3 months ago, Sister Agnes told him. Said she had to find her people. Did she say where? Jake asked, trying to mask his disappointment. The nun shook her head. The girl kept her own counsel. But she left something for you. Sister Agnes disappeared inside, returning with a small leather pouch. Inside, Jake found a woven bracelet of red and black threads and a small carved wooden horse. She worked on that horse for weeks, Sister Agnes said. Said a man who walks so his horse can carry another deserves to be remembered. Jake slipped the bracelet onto his wrist. If she comes back, I'll tell her you came, the nun promised. She was changed when she left here. Stronger. Whatever happened to her before you found her, it didn't break her spirit. Jake nodded, strangely proud of the girl he barely knew. Thank you, sister. As he rode away, Jake wondered if he would ever see Kachina again. The wooden horse found a permanent place in his pocket, a reminder of the frightened girl who had looked at him with such courage. What Jake couldn't know was that Kachina had already begun a journey that would transform her from a forgotten victim into a woman of formidable purpose, a journey that would eventually bring her back into his life in a way neither could have imagined. The years passed, and Jake's life moved forward. By 26, he had saved enough to buy a small spread near the foothills, running his own modest herd on land that others had deemed too rough for proper ranching. But Jake saw the beauty in the rugged terrain, with its hidden springs and protected valleys. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, he would take out the small wooden horse and wonder about the Apache girl. Had she found her people? Was she safe? The bracelet had long since worn away, but he kept the frayed threads in the same drawer as his father's pocket watch. Meanwhile, unknown to Jake, Kachina Azul had indeed found her way back to her people, or what remained of them. Her band had been scattered, some to reservations, others into hiding in the most remote mountains. Over time, she located survivors, learning that her uncle and 2 cousins still lived. From them, she learned the arts of survival, of tracking, of healing. And she learned something else: how to wait, how to plan, how to lead. As the years turned, Kachina's beauty matured into something striking and fierce. Her long black hair, often braided with threads of red, framed a face that had known both suffering and triumph. At 32, she moved with the confidence of a woman who had reclaimed her heritage and her power. And she had not forgotten Jake Tucker. Silver Creek, Arizona Territory, 1894. Jake, now 37, rode into town for supplies, his mind on the drought that threatened his herd. The town had grown over the years, boasting a proper hotel and even a small bank. The railroad had brought progress and prosperity to some, while pushing the native peoples further into the margins. Jake tied his horse outside the general store, nodding to Sheriff Mills on his way in. "Morning, Tucker," the sheriff said. "Heard any trouble out your way?" "Trouble?" Jake asked, pausing. "Army's been tracking a band of Apaches moving through the territory. Some say they're stirring up the reservation Indians, talking about the old ways." Jake shrugged. "Haven't seen anything." The sheriff studied him. "You always did keep to yourself out there on that rocky spread. Just watch yourself. These aren't the broken-down reservation Indians. Word is they're led by some she-devil who speaks English better than most white men." Jake's hand instinctively touched his pocket where the wooden horse still resided. "I'll keep an eye out," he said neutrally. Inside the store, Jake gathered his supplies, half listening to the gossip flowing around him. 50 warriors at least, that's what Johnson said. Attacked the Pearson place over in Dry Creek Valley. Just took the horses and left, didn't hurt nobody. Calling her the Dark Flower or some such nonsense. Jake paid for his goods, and loaded them onto his pack horse. The talk troubled him more than he wanted to admit. 15 years of relative peace had lulled many into forgetting the tensions that still simmered beneath the surface. If fighting broke out again, it would go badly for everyone, especially the Apache. As Jake rode the familiar trail home, the setting sun painting the mountains gold and crimson, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The air felt charged, like before a lightning storm. 3 miles from his cabin, Jake noticed the tracks. At least a dozen horses had crossed the trail recently, heading toward his land. His hand moved to his rifle, but he kept riding. If there was trouble, better to face it head-on. As he rounded the bend that revealed his small ranch house and corral, Jake pulled his horse to a stop. There, in his yard, stood 15 mounted Apache warriors, their faces painted for war. And at their center, a woman. Even at a distance, something about her struck him as familiar. The proud set of her shoulders, the way she sat her horse as if born to it. As he nudged his mount forward, the woman turned, and Jake felt the world tilt beneath him. Her face had changed, matured into angles and planes of extraordinary beauty, but those eyes remained the same. Dark as midnight, and now fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Kachina," he said, barely believing. She inclined her head slightly. "Jake Tucker," she replied, her voice deeper than he remembered, but unmistakable. "The one who helps." And in that moment, Jake knew that the past had finally caught up to him, bringing with it complications he could never have anticipated and a woman he had never truly forgotten. The warriors watched silently as Jake dismounted, their expressions unreadable beneath the war paint. Jake kept his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving Kachina's face. "It's been a long time," he said. 15 years, 2 moons, she replied precisely. Jake nodded, absorbing the fact that she had counted. "You brought friends." A slight smile curved her lips. "My people." One of the warriors, older than the others with streaks of gray in his braided hair, spoke sharply in Apache. Kachina answered him without taking her eyes from Jake. "My uncle thinks you should fear us," she translated. "Many white men would." Jake considered this. "Should I?" "That depends," she said, dismounting with fluid grace. Up close, he could see the woman she had become, strong, commanding, dressed in a blend of traditional Apache clothing and practical frontier wear. A knife hung at her belt, and she carried herself like someone accustomed to being obeyed. "On what?" Jake asked. "On whether you are still the man who walks so his horse can carry another." Jake's hand went to his pocket, pulling out the wooden horse. "I kept it." Something flickered in Kachina's eyes. Surprise, perhaps even pleasure. She stepped closer, taking the small carving from his palm. Their fingers brushed, and Jake felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. "You were just a girl then," he said quietly. "I was never just a girl," she replied. "Not even then." The warrior who had spoken before, her uncle, Jake realized, dismounted and approached. He examined Jake with critical eyes before turning to Kachina, speaking rapidly. She nodded. "We will make camp here tonight," she told Jake. "With your permission." It wasn't really a question, given the 15 armed warriors in his yard, but Jake appreciated the courtesy. "Of course. There's a good spot near the creek. Water for the horses." As the Apache band moved to set up camp, Jake caught Kachina's arm gently. "Why are you here, Kachina? After all this time?" Her expression grew serious. "The world is changing, Jake Tucker. My people are dying, not just from bullets, but from being forgotten, pushed aside, forced to become something they are not. I've heard talk in town. They say you're raising trouble. Is that what they call it when we refuse to disappear?" she asked, a flash of anger in her voice. "We take no lives. We only remind those who would forget us that we still exist." Jake released her arm. "And what does that have to do with me?" Kachina's gaze was steady. "You showed me once that not all white men are the same. Now I need to know if that was true, or if you have become like the others." Before Jake could respond, her uncle called to her, and she turned away, leaving Jake with more questions than answers. As he unsaddled his horse, Jake watched the efficient way the Apache set up their camp. These were not reservation Indians, broken by confinement and government rations. These were proud people who had somehow maintained their ways despite 15 years of increasing pressure to assimilate or vanish. And Kachina was clearly their leader, or at least someone of great importance among them. The way the warriors deferred to her, even the older ones, spoke of unusual respect. What had happened to transform the wounded girl he'd found into this commanding woman? And more importantly, what did she want from him now? As the evening shadows lengthened across his small ranch, Jake knew that whatever came next would change everything. The simple life he had built for himself hung in the balance, and perhaps much more. That night, Jake invited Kachina to share a meal in his cabin. Her uncle, whose name was Natani, insisted on accompanying her, his distrustful gaze never leaving Jake. "Your home is small," Kachina observed, looking around the simple two-room cabin Jake had built with his own hands. "It's enough for one man," Jake replied, serving them bowls of venison stew. "You never took a wife?" she asked bluntly. Jake shook his head. "Never found the right woman." Natani spoke to Kachina in Apache, his tone questioning. She answered briefly before turning back to Jake. "My uncle asks why you live alone so far from your town. He wonders if your people cast you out." Jake smiled slightly. "I chose this land because it's beautiful. Most ranchers want flat grassland for their cattle. I prefer the hills and valleys." As he translated, Kachina's expression softened. "You see value where others do not. This is what I remembered about you." The conversation shifted as they ate, with Kachina explaining how she had spent the years since they last met. After leaving the mission, she had searched for months before finding remnants of her band. Her mother had died during those years, but her uncle and cousins survived. Together, they had joined with other displaced Apache, creating a new band that lived in the most remote mountain regions, avoiding contact with white settlers when possible. "But now you're openly riding through settled territory," Jake pointed out. "Why risk it?" Kachina exchanged a look with her uncle before answering. "The reservation at San Carlos is dying. Disease, hunger, despair. Children are taken to schools where they are beaten for speaking our language." Her voice hardened. "We show them another way is possible. We remind our brothers and sisters that they can choose to leave. The army won't allow it," Jake said gently. "You must know that." "We do not seek permission," she replied. "We seek only to survive as ourselves." After the meal, Natani went to rejoin the others at the camp, leaving Jake and Kachina alone. In the lamplight, Jake could see both the girl she had been and the woman she had become. "Why did you really come here, Kachina?" he asked directly. "There must be safer places for your people than a white man's ranch." She studied him for a long moment. 2 days' ride from here, the government is building a new dam. It will flood a valley sacred to my people, where our ancestors have been buried for generations. Jake had heard rumors of the project, but knew little about it. "I'm sorry, but what can I do about that?" "The man who leads the project, he knows you. Marshal Richard Davis." Jake stiffened at the name. Davis had been a cavalry officer during the last Apache conflicts before becoming a federal marshal. He and Jake had a history, one that had ended with Davis swearing vengeance after Jake testified against him in a case of cattle rustling. "Davis is a dangerous man," Jake warned, "and he hates me almost as much as he hates Apache. This is why I came to you," Kachina said. "You know his ways. You are not afraid to stand against him." Jake shook his head. "That was years ago, Kachina. I'm just a small rancher now. I mind my own business." "Is that truly who you have become?" she asked, disappointment evident in her voice. "A man who watches injustice and does nothing?" The question stung. "What exactly are you planning, Kachina?" She rose, moving to the window to look out at the stars. "We will not attack. We will not kill. But we will be seen. We will make them remember that this land has guardians they cannot simply erase." Jake joined her at the window. "And if they respond with violence? Then we will defend ourselves," she said simply. "But that is not what we seek." The moonlight silvered her profile, highlighting the proud line of her jaw, the quiet strength in her bearing. Jake felt something stir within him that he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. "Why did you keep the horse?" she asked suddenly, turning to face him. Jake found himself unable to lie to those penetrating eyes. "To remember you." "Why?" "Because you haunted me," he admitted. "The girl I couldn't truly help. The one who disappeared." Kachina stepped closer. "I was never that girl, Jake Tucker. I was always becoming who I am now." The air between them seemed to thicken. Jake was acutely aware of her presence, of the subtle scent of sage and pine that clung to her hair. "And who are you now?" he asked softly. "I am Kachina Azul, daughter of Talaha, niece of Natani," leader of the Free Apache, she said with quiet pride. And I have returned to ask for your help, as once you helped me. Before Jake could respond, a shout came from outside, one of Kachina's warriors, calling an alarm. The moment between them shattered as they both rushed to the door. Outside, Jake saw his cattle moving restlessly in their pen. One of the Apache warriors pointed toward the ridge line, where multiple pinpricks of light were visible in the darkness. Torches, Kachina said grimly. Many riders. Jake knew instantly what had happened. Someone in town must have seen you coming this way. They've raised a posse. Natani appeared beside them, speaking urgently to Kachina. She nodded, then turned to Jake. We must leave. Now. No, Jake said, making a split-second decision. If you run, they'll hunt you down. Let me talk to them. These men will not listen to words, Kachina argued. Jake gripped her shoulders. Trust me, please. I need you and your warriors to stay out of sight. Let me handle this. Their eyes locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Kachina nodded. We will watch from the trees. If they mean you harm, they won't, Jake assured her, hoping he was right. Now go. Quickly. As Kachina and her warriors melted into the darkness, Jake checked his rifle, then set it aside deliberately. He would face the posse unarmed. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out into the yard and lit a large lantern, making himself visible. The torches grew closer, and soon Jake could hear the sound of horses approaching. He counted at least 20 riders, too many to fight, even with Kachina's warriors. His only hope was to defuse the situation peacefully. Sheriff Mills led the group, his face hard in the torchlight. Behind him, Jake recognized several ranchers from the area, along with some men he didn't know. Evening, Sheriff, Jake called, keeping his voice calm. What brings so many visitors to my humble home at this hour? Don't play dumb, Tucker, the sheriff replied. We had reports of Apache warriors heading this way. Have you seen them? Jake shrugged. I've been home all day. Haven't seen anyone. A rider pushed forward. Sam Becker, owner of the largest ranch in the county. He's lying, Becker spat. Engines were tracked straight to his land. Maybe they passed through, Jake suggested. I can't account for everyone who crosses my property when I'm not looking. The sheriff dismounted, approaching Jake warily. You expecting trouble, Tucker? Not like you to be up this late. Just enjoying the evening air, Jake replied. And wondering why my neighbors feel the need to ride armed onto my land without invitation. Another rider moved forward, and Jake felt his blood run cold. Marshal Richard Davis sat astride a big bay horse, his federal badge gleaming in the lantern light. His face was older than Jake remembered, lined with years of hard living, but his cold eyes were unchanged. Well, Davis drawled. Jake Tucker, still harboring sympathies for savages, I see. Jake kept his expression neutral. Marshal Davis, didn't know you were back in these parts. Government business, Davis replied. Seems some Apache troublemakers have been stirring up the reservations. Led by a woman, they say. A real wildcat. His gaze swept the darkened property. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Tucker? Like I told the sheriff, I haven't seen anyone, Jake maintained steadily. Davis dismounted, handing his reins to a deputy. He walked a slow circle around Jake, like a predator sizing up prey. You know, I never did thank you properly for that testimony you gave. Cost me my commission. Took years to rebuild my reputation. You were stealing cattle and blaming it on Apache raiders, Jake said quietly. You got what you deserved. Davis moved with surprising speed, his fist connecting with Jake's jaw and sending him staggering. Still got a loose tongue, I see. Sheriff Mills stepped between them. That's enough, Marshal. We're here about the Apache, not old grudges. Davis straightened his coat. Of course, Sheriff. Just renewing an old acquaintance. His cold smile made Jake's skin crawl. We'll have a proper search of the property. If Tucker's hiding anything, or anyone, we'll find them. Jake's mind raced. If they searched thoroughly, they would surely find signs of Kachina's people. And if that happened, blood would be spilled, perhaps including his own. You have no right, Jake protested. This is my land. Actually, Davis said smoothly, I have a federal warrant that says otherwise. He produced a paper from his coat, signed by a judge in Tucson. Gives me authority to search any property where hostile Indians might be concealed. Sheriff Mills examined the warrant with a frown. This looks legitimate, Tucker. I'm afraid we'll have to take a look around. Jake felt the situation slipping beyond his control. Somewhere in the darkness, Kachina and her warriors were watching. If the posse pushed too far, they would fight, and against these odds, they would lose. Fine, Jake said finally. Search where you want, but I'll accompany each group. I don't trust some of these men not to help themselves to my property. Davis's smile widened. By all means. In fact, I think you and I should search together. For old time's sake. As the posse divided into search parties, Jake caught a flicker of movement at the edge of the trees, a signal from Kachina. He gave an imperceptible shake of his head, hoping she would understand the danger. What Jake didn't realize was that Kachina understood far more than he knew. She had recognized Davis immediately, the leader of the soldiers who had attacked her all those years ago, and she had no intention of allowing him to harm Jake Tucker, the man who had once saved her life. As Jake walked beside Davis toward the barn, the tension between them was palpable. The marshal kept one hand near his pistol, clearly hoping for an excuse to use it. You know, Davis said conversationally, that Apache woman they're hunting. They say she's quite beautiful. Speaks English too. Almost like she lived among white folks for a while. He cast a sideways glance at Jake. Reminds me of a story I heard once. About a cavalry officer finding a young Apache girl near Silver Creek. Pretty little thing. Never did find out what happened to her after she served her purpose. Jake's fists clenched so tight his nails bit into his palms. You're a monster, Davis. I'm a realist, Tucker. The only good Indian is Marshal Davis. A shout from one of the searchers cut him off. Found something by the creek. Jake's heart sank. Davis smiled triumphantly. Shall we? As they hurried toward the creek, Jake desperately tried to think of a way out. If they'd found evidence of Kachina's warriors, the night would end in violence. The searcher, a young deputy, pointed excitedly to the ground. Tracks, sir. Lots of 'em. Horse tracks leading north. Davis knelt, examining the trail and the torchlight. Fresh. No more than an hour old. He stood, turning to Jake with a cold smile. Seems your visitors didn't stay long. Lucky for you. Jake kept his face impassive, though inside he was flooded with relief. Kachina had somehow created a false trail. Round up the men, Davis ordered. We'll follow these tracks while they're fresh. As the posse regathered, Sheriff Mills approached Jake. Sorry about all this, Tucker. Just doing our job. Jake nodded stiffly. Next time, maybe just knock on my door first. The sheriff had the grace to look embarrassed. Davis is leading this hunt. He's got jurisdiction. Be careful with him, Jake warned quietly. He's not after justice. He's after blood. Within minutes, the posse was thundering north along the creek, following the phantom trail Kachina had created. Jake watched until the torches disappeared into the darkness before releasing a long, shaky breath. They are gone. Kachina's voice came from directly behind him, making him start. Jesus. Jake turned to find her standing there, seemingly materializing from the shadows. Yes, they're gone. Following your false trail, I assume. She nodded. My warriors made it while you talked. It will lead the white men in circles until dawn, then disappear in the rocky ground. Jake ran a hand through his hair. Davis knows about you. Kachina. He remembered. And he has a federal warrant to hunt down your band. I know who he is, she said, her voice hard. The soldier who led the others that day you found me. Jake stared at her. You never told me it was Davis. I did not know his name then, but I never forgot his face. Her eyes gleamed with cold fury in the starlight. He is the reason I returned. Suddenly, many things became clear to Jake. This isn't just about the dam, is it? It's about revenge. Justice, she corrected. For what he did to me. For what he has done to many others. Jake caught her arm. Kachina, listen to me. Davis is powerful now. He has the law on his side. The white man's law, she said dismissively. Not mine. If you go after him, you'll get yourself and your people killed, Jake insisted. Is that what you want? Kachina pulled away from him. What I want, she said fiercely, is to sleep without seeing his face. What I want is for no more of my sisters to suffer as I did. What I want is for him to know fear, as I knew it. Her passion and pain struck Jake to the core. This was not the frightened girl he had rescued, nor even the proud woman who had returned with warriors. This was someone who had carried a wound for 15 years, a wound that had never truly healed. There are other ways, Jake said gently. Legal ways. If Davis committed crimes against an Apache girl, Kachina laughed bitterly. Who would believe me? Who would care? I would, Jake said simply. I do. The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach her. Kachina's expression softened slightly. You have a good heart, Jake Tucker. But good hearts do not change the world. Sometimes they do, he insisted. If you go down this path, if you attack Davis or his men, you'll prove every terrible thing they say about your people. Is that the legacy you want? Kachina was silent for a long moment, looking out into the darkness where the posse had disappeared. My people are camped in the high canyon, she said finally. We will wait there while I consider your words. Relief washed through Jake. Thank you. She turned back to him, her eyes searching his face. Why do you care what happens to me now, after so many years? It was a question Jake had been asking himself since the moment he recognized her in his yard. The answer came to him with surprising clarity. Because from the day I found you, something in me knew you were important, he said honestly. Not just to your people, but to me. Kachina stepped closer, close enough that Jake could feel the warmth of her breath. And now? What am I to you now, Jake Tucker? The question hung between them, charged with possibilities. Jake found himself reaching out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. Someone I never want to lose again, he whispered. For a breathless moment, they stood at the precipice of something neither had expected. Then a bird call sounded from the trees, one of her warriors, signaling. Kachina stepped back. I must go. My people are waiting. Jake nodded, letting his hand fall. Will I see you again? Yes, she promised. But next time, I will not bring warriors to your door. Only myself. With that, she melted into the darkness, leaving Jake to wonder if he had just made the greatest mistake of his life, or perhaps found his way back to the path he was always meant to follow. The next morning, Jake rode into town, his mind still full of Kachina. He needed information about Davis's dam project and, more importantly, evidence of the marshal's past crimes. If there was a legal way to stop Davis, Jake was determined to find it. Silver Creek had changed since Jake first arrived as a young cowhand. The dusty cattle town had grown into a respectable settlement, with a bank, a hotel, and even a small newspaper office. It was to this last establishment that Jake directed his steps. The Silver Creek Sentinel was run by Eliza Morgan, a formidable widow who had taken over the paper after her husband's death 10 years earlier. Known for her sharp intellect and sharper pen, Mrs. Morgan was perhaps the only person in town who might be willing to investigate a federal marshal. Jake Tucker, she greeted him as he entered the cluttered office. Twice in 1 month. To what do I owe the pleasure? Information, Mrs. Morgan, Jake said, removing his hat. About Marshal Davis and his dam project. Her eyebrows rose. Interesting timing. Half the town's talking about the posse that rode out to your place last night. Something about Apache warriors. Rumors, Jake said dismissively. What can you tell me about the dam? Mrs. Morgan studied him shrewdly before gesturing to a chair. It's a federal project. Supposedly for irrigation and flood control. Construction starts in 2 weeks. And the location? A valley west of here. Eagle Canyon, she confirmed. Why the interest? Jake chose his words carefully. I've heard concerns about the site. That it might have historical significance. You mean Indian burial grounds? Mrs. Morgan said bluntly. Yes, I've heard the same. Tried to write about it last month, but Davis paid me a visit. Suggested it wouldn't be healthy for my paper's advertising revenue if I pursued the story. Jake leaned forward. Mrs. Morgan, what do you know about Davis's history in this territory? Specifically with the Apache. The editor's eyes narrowed. I know he was involved in some ugly business during the last conflicts. Rumors of atrocities that were never officially investigated. She lowered her voice. There were stories about women and girls from the tribes. Nothing that could be proven, of course. What if there was proof? Jake asked. A witness. Mrs. Morgan set down her pen. Jake Tucker, what exactly have you gotten yourself involved in? Jake sighed. I'm not entirely sure yet. But I need to know, if there was evidence against Davis, would you print it? I print the truth, Mr. Tucker. Always have. She fixed him with a stern gaze. But I'd advise caution. Davis has powerful friends in the territorial government. As Jake left the newspaper office, his mind was working rapidly. If he could somehow document Davis's crimes, perhaps through Kachina's testimony, it might be enough to discredit the marshal. But would Kachina be willing to relive her trauma in a white man's court? And would anyone believe her? Lost in thought, Jake nearly collided with Sheriff Mills outside the general store. Tucker, the sheriff nodded. Thought you'd be tending your ranch today. Needed supplies, Jake replied. Any luck with your Apache hunt last night? Mills shook his head in frustration. Followed those tracks for miles. Led nowhere. Davis was fit to be tied. Maybe there weren't any Apache after all, Jake suggested. Maybe, the sheriff said, not sounding convinced. Davis thinks differently. He's convinced someone's harboring them. His gaze sharpened. You'd tell me if you knew anything, wouldn't you, Tucker? For the sake of peace in this territory. Jake met the man's eyes steadily. I want peace as much as anyone, Sheriff. As Jake gathered his supplies, he could feel the weight of Davis's presence in the town. The marshal had set up temporary headquarters in the hotel, and his deputies were visible on the streets, questioning residents about Apache sightings. Jake needed to warn Kachina about the increased vigilance. But how could he find her without leading Davis straight to her people? As he rode out of town, Jake noticed a rider following at a distance. One of Davis's men, no doubt. The marshal wasn't taking any chances. Jake took a circuitous route home, eventually losing his shadow in a series of rocky draws. Instead of heading directly to his ranch, he turned toward the high canyon where Kachina had said her people were camped. The approach to the canyon was treacherous, with narrow trails winding between sheer rock faces. As Jake guided his horse carefully along one such path, the distinct feeling of being watched prickled at the back of his neck. I know you're there, he called out, reining his horse to a stop. Show yourself. A young Apache warrior stepped out from behind a boulder, bow in hand. Jake recognized him as one of Kachina's band from the previous night. I need to speak with Kachina, Jake said. The warrior regarded him silently, then whistled, a sound like a canyon wren. Moments later, Kachina appeared on the trail ahead, mounted on a paint pony. Jake Tucker, she greeted him. You should not have come here. Davis has men watching me, Jake explained, and he's increased patrols around the territory. I needed to warn you. Kachina gestured for him to follow her up the trail. Come. It is not safe to talk in the open. The Apache camp was well hidden in a box canyon, accessible only by the narrow trail they had ascended. About 30 people, men, women, and children, went about their daily tasks among the lodges set up beneath the shelter of a massive rock overhang. Jake noticed how the camp was organized for quick evacuation if necessary. Kachina led him to a fire where Natani sat with several other older Apache. The warriors regarded Jake with suspicion, but at a word from Kachina, they made space for him. Tell them what you told me, she instructed. Jake described the increased patrols and Davis's determination to find them. He won't give up easily, he concluded, and he has the law on his side. Natani spoke in Apache, his tone grave. Kachina listened, then turned to Jake. My uncle says we have faced such men before. We will move deeper into the mountains. And the dam? Jake asked. What about your sacred land? Kachina's expression hardened. We have not forgotten, but we must protect our people first. As they talked, Jake noticed a young woman watching him curiously from nearby. When she approached, Jake was struck by her resemblance to Kachina, the same proud bearing, though her features were softer. Kachina followed his gaze. My cousin Layla. She was a child when I found my way back to our people. Layla spoke to Kachina in Apache, her voice melodious. Kachina replied, then explained to Jake. She asks if you are the man from my wooden horse story. Jake felt warmth spread through him at the thought that Kachina had shared their history with others. I suppose I am. I told the children many times, Kachina admitted, a rare smile softening her face. Of the white man who walked so others could ride. The intimacy of the moment was interrupted by a warrior hurrying into camp. He spoke rapidly to Natani, gesturing back down the canyon. Kachina's expression changed instantly. Riders coming. Many of them. Jake's blood ran cold. Davis? How could he have found this place? Someone must have followed you, Kachina said, already issuing commands to her people. Women gathered children, while warriors collected weapons. I was careful, Jake protested. I lost the man following me. Natani barked something at Kachina, pointing at Jake accusingly. My uncle says you have betrayed us, she translated, though her eyes held doubt. No, Jake insisted. Never. But we need to move quickly. How many warriors do you have? 15 who can fight, she answered. Against how many white men? If it's Davis's full posse, at least 20. Plus, they have better weapons. Kachina conferred quickly with Natani and the other leaders. There is another way out of the canyon, she told Jake. A hidden path. The elders, women, and children will go that way. And the rest. We will delay them, she said simply. Jake shook his head. That's suicide, Kachina. It is necessary, she countered. To protect our future. Looking around at the frightened children being hurried toward the back of the canyon, Jake made a decision. Let me go down. Let me talk to them. They will not listen to you, Kachina argued. Maybe not, but it might buy more time for your people to escape. Jake gripped her shoulders. Trust me, please. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, something passed between them, a recognition of shared purpose that transcended the barriers of their different worlds. Very well, she said finally. But take 2 warriors with you. If the white men show violence, return immediately. Jake nodded, already moving toward his horse. Get your people out, Kachina. I'll find you after. How? She asked. Jake reached into his pocket, pulling out the wooden horse. Keep this. I'll come for it. Kachina took the carving, her fingers closing around it tightly. Be careful, Jake Tucker. As Jake rode down the canyon with 2 silent Apache warriors flanking him, he tried to formulate what he would say to Davis. The truth seemed impossible, lies dangerous. He would have to navigate a treacherous middle ground. When they rounded a bend and came face to face with the approaching posse, Jake raised his hand in a gesture of peace. Sheriff Mills was in the lead, with Davis just behind him. The marshal's face darkened with rage at the sight of Jake with the Apache warriors. Hold your fire, Jake called out as several men raised rifles. Sheriff, I need to speak with you. Mills signaled for the posse to halt. Tucker, what the hell are you doing with these Indians? Preventing bloodshed, Jake replied. Sheriff, there are women and children up this canyon. Peaceful people who have done nothing wrong. Davis pushed his horse forward. Nothing wrong? They're renegades, Tucker. Off the reservation illegally. They're people trying to survive, Jake countered. People whose sacred land you're planning to flood with your dam. Davis's eyes narrowed. So that's what this is about. You're helping them interfere with a federal project. I'm trying to prevent a massacre, Jake said firmly. Sheriff, you're a reasonable man. There's no need for violence here. Mills looked uncomfortable. The marshal has a warrant, Tucker. A warrant to arrest warriors, not to kill women and children, Jake argued. Let them leave peacefully. That's all I'm asking. Davis laughed coldly. And why should we do that? Because you've taken up with some Apache squaw. Jake's temper flared, but he controlled it. Losing his composure now would only endanger Kachina's people. Because it's the right thing to do. Because enough blood has been spilled in this territory. For a moment, Jake thought he might be getting through to the sheriff and some of the other men. Then Davis drew his pistol. Enough talk. These savages are under arrest, and so are you, Tucker, for aiding and abetting. The Apache warriors beside Jake tensed, reaching for their weapons. Jake held up his hand, stopping them. Don't, he warned. That's what he wants. Davis's smile was ugly. Smart man. Now all of you dismount. Slowly, as Jake prepared to comply, hoping to at least delay the posse while Kachina's people escaped, a war cry echoed through the canyon. Looking up, he saw Kachina standing on a ledge above, her figure silhouetted against the sky. Behind her, more warriors appeared along the canyon rim, bows drawn. Davis and his men looked up in alarm, suddenly realizing they were exposed in the narrow canyon bottom. Leave this place, Kachina called down, her voice carrying clearly, or the next words will be spoken with arrows. Davis raised his pistol toward her. Without hesitation, Jake launched himself from his horse, tackling the marshal to the ground. The gun discharged, the bullet harmlessly hitting rock. Chaos erupted. The Apache warriors released a volley of arrows, deliberately aimed to land near the posse rather than strike them. Horses reared in panic, men shouted in confusion. Get out of the canyon. Sheriff Mills yelled to his men. We're sitting ducks here. As the posse retreated in disarray, Jake struggled with Davis on the ground. The marshal was strong, but Jake's fury gave him an edge. He managed to pin Davis down, knocking the pistol from his hand. This isn't over, Tucker, Davis snarled. You've chosen your side. With savages. No, Jake replied, his voice steady. I've chosen to stand against men like you. Men who use power to hurt the defenseless. A shadow fell over them. Jake looked up to see Kachina standing there, a bow in her hand, arrow nocked but not drawn. "Let him go," she told Jake. "He is not worth your hands being stained." Jake hesitated, then released Davis, stepping back. The marshal climbed to his feet, his face contorted with hatred. "You'll both hang for this," he promised. "No, Richard Davis," Katchina said, her voice ice cold. "You will answer for your crimes. For what you and your men did to a young girl 15 years ago. For the women you have hurt. For the lives you have destroyed." Davis's face paled slightly. "No one will believe an Indian's word against mine." "Perhaps not," Jake agreed. "But they might believe documents. Army reports. Witness statements. The kind Mrs. Morgan at the Sentinel might find interesting." It was a bluff, but one that struck home. Davis's confidence faltered. "You're threatening me?" "I'm promising you," Jake corrected. "Leave these people alone. Stop the dam project, or everything I can find about your past comes to light." For a long moment, the three stood in a tense triangle of conflicting wills. Then Davis backed away, retrieving his pistol from the ground. "This territory is changing, Tucker," he said quietly. "There's no place for Indians or their sympathizers in the new order. Remember that." As Davis mounted his horse and rode after his scattered posse, Jake felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The confrontation had been averted for now, but the danger was far from past. Katchina touched his arm. "My people are safe. They have reached the hidden trails." "Davis won't give up," Jake warned. "This is just the beginning." She nodded. "I know. But today, we have won a small victory." Her eyes met his. "Because of you." In that moment, standing in the dust of the canyon with the echo of conflict still hanging in the air, Jake knew his life had irrevocably changed course. Whatever came next, he and Katchina were now bound together in a struggle that would demand everything they had. And somehow, despite the danger ahead, Jake felt more alive than he had in 15 years. The next 2 weeks unfolded in a delicate dance of tension and strategy. Katchina's band moved deeper into the mountains, establishing a new camp in a location known only to Jake. Meanwhile, Jake threw himself into gathering evidence against Davis. Mrs. Morgan proved an invaluable ally. Through her newspaper connections, she unearthed troubling reports about Davis's military career. Patterns of missing supplies when he was quartermaster, unexplained deaths of Apache prisoners, settlements that were supposed to be protected but were mysteriously raided. Nothing definitive, she told Jake when they met secretly at his ranch. But enough smoke to suggest a significant fire. Jake nodded. "What about the dam project?" "That's more interesting," Mrs. Morgan said, producing a thick folder of papers. The original survey recommended a different location entirely. Davis personally pushed for the Eagle Canyon site, despite engineering concerns. Why would he do that? Jake wondered. Money, most likely. He's purchased land downstream that will increase in value once the dam is built. She hesitated. But there's something else. A notation in one of the reports about mineral deposits in the canyon. "Gold?" Jake asked. "Possibly. Whatever it is, Davis wants access to that canyon badly." She fixed Jake with a penetrating stare. "Your Apache friends. They know what's there, don't they?" Jake shrugged noncommittally. "Their concern is the sacred nature of the land." Mrs. Morgan wasn't fooled. "Be careful, Jake. Davis is becoming desperate. Word is he's bringing in more men, professional gun hands, not local volunteers." The warning proved prescient. 3 days later, Jake rode into Silver Creek to find the town transformed. Hard-faced men in dusters lounged on street corners, their gun belts prominently displayed. They watched Jake with predatory interest as he tied his horse outside the sheriff's office. Inside, he found Sheriff Mills looking troubled. "Tucker, figured you'd show up eventually." "What's happening, Sheriff?" "Who are these men?" Mills lowered his voice. "Davis brought them in. Deputy U.S. Marshals, he calls them. But between you and me, they look more like hired guns than lawmen." "Has he shown you their credentials?" "Doesn't have to," Mills said unhappily. "Federal authority trumps mine. But I don't like it, Tucker. These men, they're not here for justice." Jake leaned closer. "Sheriff, I've been gathering information about Davis. Things that would interest the territorial governor." "Don't," Mills cut him off. "Don't tell me. Whatever you're planning, I can't be part of it." He glanced toward the window. "But I can tell you Davis is moving up his timetable. Construction crews are heading to Eagle Canyon tomorrow, not next week as planned." Jake straightened. "Thanks, Sheriff. I didn't tell you anything," Mills replied firmly. And Tucker, watch yourself. Davis has been saying things. About you harboring Indians. About treason. As Jake left the sheriff's office, he felt eyes following him down the street. One of Davis's men peeled away from a storefront, clearly intending to track him. Jake decided to let him follow, but not back to his ranch. Instead, he rode south, toward the territorial capital in Tucson. It was a gamble, but one Jake felt he had to take. If he could reach the governor with the evidence he and Mrs. Morgan had gathered, there was a chance, slim, but real, of halting Davis's plans legally. What Jake didn't know was that Kachina had her own plans unfolding. Having heard from her scouts about the construction crews, she had mobilized her warriors. Not for an attack, as Davis might have expected, but for something far more powerful, a demonstration. As dawn broke over Eagle Canyon the next day, the construction foreman led his team of workers toward the dam site. What they found stopped them in their tracks. Lining the rim of the canyon stood over 100 Apache, men, women, and children, silent and still as statues. They made no threatening moves, displayed no weapons. They simply stood, witnesses to the desecration about to begin. The foreman, a practical man named Harlow, ordered his workers to wait while he rode to Silver Creek to inform Davis. When Davis arrived 2 hours later, his face purple with rage, the Apache remained, immovable as the rocks beneath their feet. His hired gunmen spread out, rifles ready. "This is a legal assembly," Davis shouted up at them. "Disperse immediately or face arrest." No one moved. No one spoke. "I said disperse." Davis drew his pistol, firing a shot into the air. Still, the Apache stood their ground, their silent dignity more powerful than any show of force. Davis turned to his men. "Arrest them. All of them." One of the gunmen shifted uncomfortably. "Marshal, there's women and children up there. And they ain't doing nothing but standing. They're interfering with a federal project," Davis snapped. "That's enough." As tensions mounted at the canyon, Jake was racing back from Tucson. His meeting with the governor's secretary had been frustratingly inconclusive. The governor was away, the evidence needed review, processes had to be followed. But Jake had left the documents in official hands, extracting a promise that the matter would be investigated. It wasn't enough, and Jake knew it. Davis would force the confrontation before any official action could be taken. Pushing his horse to its limits, Jake reached Silver Creek by mid-afternoon, only to learn from Sheriff Mills that Davis and his men had gone to the canyon. The sheriff's expression told Jake everything he needed to know. "How bad?" Jake asked. "Bad enough," Mills replied grimly. "He's taken most of his men, and they weren't planning on a peaceful negotiation." Jake was back in the saddle instantly, riding hard for Eagle Canyon. As he approached, the sound of a rifle shot echoed through the hills, followed by another. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he pushed his exhausted horse forward. The scene that greeted him at the canyon was one of controlled chaos. Davis's men had formed a line at the base of the canyon, rifles aimed upward. Several had fired warning shots, but the Apache remained unmoved. Among them, Jake spotted Kachina, standing proudly in the center of the line. Davis was shouting himself hoarse, his composure completely abandoned. "Last warning. Disperse, or we open fire." Jake rode directly between Davis and the canyon wall. "Stop this madness, Davis." Davis whirled, his eyes wild. "Tucker, I might have known you'd be behind this." "They're peaceful," Jake said loudly, making sure the workers, and even Davis's own men could hear. "They're simply standing on land that has been sacred to their people for generations. Land you want to destroy for your own profit. This is a federal project, a project you manipulated," Jake cut in. "For access to mineral deposits. For personal gain. The governor's office is already investigating." Davis's face contorted. "You're lying. The documents are already in the governor's hands," Jake pressed. "Reports, witness statements, evidence of your corruption." For a moment, Jake thought he'd gotten through. Davis's expression flickered with uncertainty. Then the marshal's face hardened. "Kill him," he ordered one of his gunmen. "He's interfering with federal officers." The man hesitated. "Marshal, I didn't sign on for murdering white men in cold blood." Davis drew his own weapon. "Then I'll do it myself." As the marshal aimed at Jake, a single arrow streaked down from the canyon rim, striking Davis's hand. The marshal screamed, dropping his pistol as blood spurted from the wound. Jake looked up to see Kachina lowering a bow, her expression fierce. Davis clutched his bleeding hand. "Open fire," he shrieked to his men. "Kill them all." But his men had seen enough. One by one, they lowered their weapons, backing away. The construction workers, too, began to disperse, wanting no part in a massacre. "Cowards!" Davis raged. "Traitors!" As his support crumbled around him, Davis seemed to collapse inward, his grandiose plans dissolving before his eyes. When Sheriff Mills rode up minutes later with several deputies, the marshal was sitting alone in the dust, cradling his wounded hand, abandoned by his hired guns. "Richard Davis," Mills said formally, "I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder, corruption of office, and inciting violence against peaceful persons." As Mills led the broken marshal away, Jake looked up at the canyon rim. The Apache remained, still watching silently. Among them, Kachina raised her hand in a gesture that was both acknowledgement and farewell. Jake knew this was far from over. The battle for the canyon, for justice, for the future of the Apache in a changing world, all of it would continue. But today, at least, they had won a victory without bloodshed. That night, as Jake sat alone on his porch watching the stars emerge, he heard the soft sound of hoofbeats approaching. Kachina appeared from the darkness, dismounting gracefully before the steps. "I hoped you would come," Jake said softly. She joined him on the porch, her presence bringing with it the scent of sage and pine. "My people are celebrating tonight. A victory without death is rare in our history. Davis will face trial," Jake told her, "and the dam project has been suspended pending investigation." "Because of you," Kachina acknowledged. Jake shook his head. "Because of us. Together." She studied him in the fading light. "What happens now, Jake Tucker?" It was the question that had been circling in Jake's mind since the confrontation at the canyon. What had happened now? The immediate danger was past, but the larger issues remained. The Apache could not live forever in hiding, and the push of white civilization would not stop with Davis's dam. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know what I want." Kachina raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" Jake took her hand, marveling at how right it felt in his. 15 years ago, I found a girl who needed help. Today, I found a woman who showed me what courage truly means." He met her eyes steadily. "I want to walk beside you, Kachina, whatever path you choose." For a long moment, she was silent, her expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. Then, slowly, she smiled, a rare, transformative expression that touched something deep within Jake's heart. "My path has always led back to you," she said softly, "even when I did not know it." As the stars wheeled overhead, Jake and Kachina sat together on the porch, their fingers intertwined, speaking of possibilities. Of a ranch that might become a haven for displaced Apache. Of children who might grow up knowing both worlds. Of a love that had begun with a simple act of kindness and grown into something powerful enough to change the course of 2 lives, and perhaps many more. The wooden horse sat between them on the porch rail, a silent witness to the journey that had brought them full circle. From a forgotten Apache girl to a woman of strength and purpose. From a young cowboy to a man who had found his true north. The forgotten girl returned with warriors, Jake mused, touching the carving. But she brought more than that. She brought hope. Kachina leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. And the cowboy who helped her found more than he expected. Much more, Jake agreed, his arm encircling her shoulders. Together, they watched the night deepen over the land they both loved, different yet the same. The battles ahead would be many, the path uncertain. But in that moment, on a porch under the vast Arizona sky, Jake Tucker and Kachina Azul found something precious and rare in the American West. A future where love bridged the divide between 2 worlds, and hope shone brighter than the stars above.